the Mindset Michele TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us for yet another incredible episode with today's extra special guest, the wonderful Dr. Sarah Beecroft. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's fabulous having you on the show, and thank you so much again for coming on. For those of you that haven't come across Dr. Sarah or Sarah, she is this incredible life scientist, and she works at the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. I wouldn't want to try and say that very fast when I'm very tired, but yes, the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. And she describes herself as a science nerd, and the Supercomputing Centre is, as it sounds, somewhere where they work with a lot of data, a lot of information. But Sarah brings together that fabulous intersection between data and large data sets, but also biology in some of the areas that she's very interested in. But I'm fascinated how somebody comes to be working in a supercomputing centre and the type of fascinating work that you must be doing, but also your journey to getting there. So Sarah, please explain to people a bit about your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Well, I think like most people in this line of work, I didn't have a linear career trajectory whatsoever. So my first job out of high school was actually selling roller shutters over the phone, which then I did waitressing. I worked at a bank as a bank teller for quite some time while I was at uni. But after a while, I decided, oh, actually, I do want to go back to uni, and I really wanted to be a medical researcher. I've always loved understanding why. I've always found biology really interesting. My mum was a nurse, and so I was always surrounded by that type of influence growing up. Yeah, so I actually ended up doing a PhD in rare disease genetics. So rare diseases, they're really nasty, like nerve and muscle diseases was my specialty. And so if you think about someone like Stephen Hawking, like that, but it could be anywhere from babies that haven't been born yet, young people, all the way through to old age. So trying to understand what is the genetic mutation that's causing this disease was my line of work for about 7 years actually. So and doing that is actually really computational these days, to understand all of that genetic data that we can now access it really quickly and easily these days, relatively speaking, but actually understanding that data requires a lot of computing. And so that's how I ended up working at the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. They need people that can understand biology, but also that can do the compute. So now my job is actually helping other biologists to solve these big computational problems so that they can do their science and do their research.
Wow, and thank you so much for explaining it so beautifully, Sarah. Understanding how the data, that large processing of data sets for how your mum was a nurse and kind of very much influenced you to go back and do your PhD in rare diseases, and then you're working in that field and looking at genetic data, getting that understanding about how the large data sets give you that insight and give you that information about what's happening. And now you're working for the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. And so thank you so much for explaining that intersection between the data and the biology, and why when people are looking at rare diseases or other forms of biology, they actually need the data sets to be able to bring together all of those amazing and different pieces of information.
Yeah,
so
thanks.
Sarah, I guess the other question then, with your unique lens and different way of looking at things, can you explain a little bit more around what success means to you with using all of that big data and understanding so much about life and DNA and biology? What does success now mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I thought about this for a while. And I think if you want to look at it at a sort of meta level, overall, I think success is probably continual growth and progress. I would say is what it feels for me. So I really like the idea of being able to look back and say, wow, like look at how far I've come in 6 months or 12 months, or look at what we achieved with this project, or, you know, like look at what I've been able to achieve in my personal life. And I really think that recognizes that you never really stop learning. I don't think anybody gets to the point where they're like, well, I have reached the pinnacle of human achievement and I'm done now. I'm just going to watch Oprah all day or whatever. You're always kind of growing and changing and doing new things. And so, you know, if you had asked me 5 years ago, can you give me like a hard metric on what does success look like? I probably would have said, you know, I want to get a really highly competitive research fellowship. But my goals have actually changed. So now my success would be helping other people to achieve their research goals, or making, you know, the Pawsey service easier to use, right? And so what I like about thinking of success as a growth proposition is that it does allow you to have flexibility, and, you know, at different stages of your life, you will want different things, and that's okay. You don't have to be doggedly looking for the one thing the whole time.
I love that, and it makes so much sense hearing you speak about it in this way about growth, because it really does kind of link back to biology and watching things grow and change over time. And so I can really see how there's that wonderful linkage with your definition of success now being also tied into what has been a very big area for you around watching different data sets, different biology samples, you know, and how your understanding of them changes and grows as you understand more about the data or the biology itself. And I love that final point that you were making about, because we never stop learning, that means that our definition of success never really stops growing and changing with us as well. Some really fabulous insights there. Sarah, I think with so much success and so much background in these different areas, what do you think you would possibly say to people then that for them are things that can help them with their own success? What sort of tips or suggestions would you have for people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd say the number one thing, which I still struggle with, to be honest, we all have our little things that are difficult for us. I'd say the number one thing is this growth mindset. And so this is actually something I came across, I was reminded about its existence early on during my PhD. And so I went to one of these like writing workshops or something that the university hosts, which are very useful if you're doing a PhD. I highly recommend. But what the person running the workshop said was about 30% of people that start a PhD don't finish it, which seems like a fairly high dropout rate, because there's, you know, a lot of pre-qualification that goes into starting a PhD. And she said from some studies that she had read, one of the key things that differentiates the people that manage to finish and those that don't manage to finish was having this growth mindset. So what I mean by that is not thinking of your skills as being fixed. So you believe that you can grow to meet the demands of a new challenge. And so I found that really important, because I had a really good honours project, and then I was a research assistant for a while. So when I went into my PhD, I was feeling, you know, super confident. I'm going to smash this, no problems. And that wasn't actually really the right mindset to have. It's good to be confident, but then when things started to get hard, and they should be difficult a bit during a PhD, it's meant to grow you and stretch you professionally. I was a bit like, oh no, like I'm failing. Like, well, no, you need to rise to meet this challenge, and you can do it. And so that was like an epiphany for me. And I still have that quite a lot now, because I'm kind of always feeling a little bit out of my depth, or quite often out of my comfort zone. Like I've essentially changed fields. I'm not a researcher anymore. I'm not primarily a biologist anymore. The team that I work with is physicists and people that have done PhD in computer science and quantum. And so, you know, it's not always easy to get through that self-doubt. And it does still get in the way sometimes, but knowing that you can, you know, you can grow to meet a challenge, I think is very important.
I love that. I love how you so beautifully describe about how when you were starting your PhD and already feeling very confident, because yes, you know, people appreciate that takes many years of study to even reach that point where you then apply yourself to do that level of study. And then yes, understanding that as it gets difficult and as you know you're going into the PhD and it's challenging you and it's stretching you, that also is where we talk about comfort zone a lot in coaching, but where your comfort zone starts to be stretched. But that understanding, I think, through that growth mindset help, understanding that that's part of the journey and part of what you're doing is you're being challenged, you're being stretched, and then that then creates a new you and a different you. And I love how you brought all of that so beautifully together. Again, recognizing that it didn't stop when you stopped your PhD, that now that you're working with scientists and you know data scientists and people that have a physics degree or physicists, so people that are also really highly qualified and skilled in their particular area. So it's stretching you again, that you're really recognizing that this growth mindset and this expansion is something that continues on, and that if you've done it, and this is why I love this fabulous example you've got, because that growth mindset, recognizing it the way that you have, you've also recognized that it doesn't just stop when you finish the current task. It kind of continues on and continues on, because that growth mindset is something to develop as a habit and as a pattern, and recognize that yes, I love that when you talked about it gets a bit hard. It does. Life's a bit hard when you're stepping outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always hard, I think, to do that, and it's fun as well. But yeah, I do agree. You have to kind of apply it as a practice or as a tool. It's not something that's necessarily innately who you are, and I never have to worry about that again. You have to keep at it, like exercising, I guess. You get stronger, but still can still be challenging sometimes.
It can be. And what else do you think, you know, that the kind of discipline and stickiness, if you like, to do that level of study and to continue to do it for the number of years you would have had to do it, what do you think are some of the skills or the things that helped you with doing it?
And like in terms of very practical things that help me stick at it. Yeah, I think certainly sitting down and planning what it is that you're going to be doing. So I actually learned this a lot from my PhD supervisor, who's a very focused woman called Gina. She would be immensely successful in anything she put her mind to, I think, because of all of the skills that she has. But something I learned from her is being very strategic with your time. So, for example, if we were looking to do something in the wet lab, so, you know, beakers and vials and all this type of stuff, she would say, look, don't waste your many hours of work trying to get this antibody to work. You know, they're very finicky things. Instead, of what you should do is like order 3, test them all, go with the best one. And so it was this really business actually mindset of how can we optimize your time, and balancing it with money, of course, always something to think about in medical research. But also sitting down and thinking like, okay, well, what are my priorities for the next 3 months? What projects do I need to complete so that I can get that fellowship at the end of the line? All right, so if I'm going to be doing this in 3 months' time, I'm going to have this project finished. What do I need to do by month 2, by the end of month 1? What do I need to do this week to help progress that along? And keeping very accountable with the timelines that you've set. Easier said than done. That's also a skill. But really like sitting down and kind of mapping out your projects and your plans and allocating time for things. Because having a to-do list is good, but actually having it scheduled in your calendar means you're a lot more likely to do whatever it is, particularly if you don't want to do it. For example, anyone that's done a PhD will know writing your thesis is something no one ever wants to do. So finding these kind of life hacks, I guess, to force you to do the things that you don't want to do. It's easy to do the stuff that you like. It's hard to get started on the stuff you don't like, but that's usually where you get the most growth and where the important tasks happen.
But Sarah, what do you think out of, you know, when you're working with people in the Pawsey and the supercomputing space, or when you're working with shareholders that are people that you're trying to explain about the supercomputing to, what do you think if they were to ask you, you know, what do you do to keep motivated? You know, obviously you've done a lot of fabulous work in the research and the PhD, etc. space. But, you know, getting up for work day in, day out, those large data sets that may take a bit of time and research projects that may take time, or even, like you're saying now, helping people to set up their projects with Pawsey. What is it that what are some tips or suggestions you have for keeping a positive focus then?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the number one thing is probably having, where possible, a good work-life balance. As the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're really exhausted and you know you haven't had a day off in a really long time and you're burnt out, I think you know you're not going to be particularly motivated, and your enthusiasm in your work will probably suffer. So actually looking after your looking after yourself as a human being primarily before looking after yourself as a worker or as a student or you know as a parent or whatever, where as much as you can, so that you can bring your best self to work. And so finding things that nourish you obviously is important. In terms of the sort of day-to-day grind, I'm quite lucky in that I get to choose a lot of the projects that I work on, and so I'm really motivated by things that I find interesting. Like if there's an intellectual curiosity there, I'm like, oh yes, this is fun. Like I want to get into that. So, you know, that really helps if you're interested in the work. That said, there's still things that I find boring, of course, there's like that in any role. So one of my favorite people is my 3.5-year-old niece, Octavia, right? And, you know, spending time with her, I realized that she's basically just like a miniature version of any adult that I've ever met, generally, that if she doesn't want to do something, we do a bit of cajoling to get her to go to bed or to eat her vegetables or to take a bath, something that she doesn't want to do. I'm like, well, you know, on some level, I feel a little bit like a 3.5-year-old. Like, I don't want to write this email or I don't want to attend to this thing. So it's like, well, okay, like, how can I control myself into this? Like, maybe I can go for a walk afterwards, or, you know, maybe I'll like buy a coffee, or I'll have lunch with a colleague or something. And so it's like, if you eat your vegetables, if you respond to this ticket that you don't want to respond to, you know, you kind of bribe yourself, I guess is one of the ways I get through it. The other way is literally just gritting your teeth, removing all distractions. I often lock myself in like a quiet meeting room somewhere to get to work, or I have the big noise cancelling headphones on. And so there's no distractions. And you just think, all right, I'm going to feel a lot better once this is done. So I don't know if that's motivation so much as just getting through the things you aren't motivated to do, but in some ways they're the same thing. Like motivation comes and goes. Discipline is what will get you through the month, the week, the year.
And I really love that very, again, practical approach to what you were talking about in terms of work-life balance, and talking about Olivia, your fabulous niece, your 3-year-old niece, and appreciating that there's elements in her and in ourselves, like eating your vegetables, whatever that is for you, you know, finding the ways to cajole, bribe, understanding that what can work in those situations is responding to like that childlike part of ourselves that really is dragging our feet and not wanting to do it, and gritting our teeth so that, you know, the adult part of us takes us into that meeting room or takes us away somewhere where there's no distractions, there's no, you know, checking your media, your phone, or checking in social media, so that you can bring that focus and that time to what you're doing. I'm kind of interested as well, one of the things that I'm aware of for women in particular in STEM is that sometimes it can be a slightly different journey. I'm not going to say harder or easier, but a different kind of journey, being perhaps the only woman in the room or being the youngest woman in the room. All of that can also bring with it, and I like using the example you had of vegetables. It can bring situations where you're faced perhaps with a vegetable you don't like, and it's a unique or it's a different sort of experience because you're a woman or a young woman. Do you want to share where you have some fabulous tools again for creating a positive mindset in those situations?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good question. I'd have to say at Pawsey, I've been very lucky. The culture there is genuinely really great, and the people are really nice. I was a little bit worried when I first started. Before I started there, I'm like, okay, I've accepted this job. It's basically all men all the time. I was a bit worried that the culture might not be great, but it has been really good. So in that sense, I've actually been shielded from a lot of that type of thing, but it certainly still does exist. So, for example, people assuming that like I'm not actually in a technical role, or or like if I say something, they're like, but if someone else says it, they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And they're like, oh, come on. And so that can be frustrating. I think one of the key things is having allies around you. And, there's no shortage of them at Pawsey, I have to say. So that, you can either, well, for two reasons. One is to have a bit of a support network so that you don't feel so isolated when that type of thing does happen. And so you can have a bit of a rant and you can commiserate. But also in terms of having an ally where they can maybe understand some of what is happening, these unspoken, subtle things going on. And so maybe you and the ally can team up on a project. And so if what you're saying isn't really getting any traction, they can perhaps help advertise it for you. And so you still get the outcome that you want, but they're kind of pushing it.
That's part of where my question was coming from, in that not always, and as I said, it's not always good or bad, but it is a different type of experience. Many people from minority groups, male, female, whoever, would also say that if they said something in a meeting, it doesn't get treated seriously. But if a male, and an older white male, was to say the same thing, everybody goes, oh, that's great. So I think for women, and women in particular in STEM, it's a great suggestion about finding an ally, somebody that when you do make a suggestion in a meeting will recognise and go, oh, Sarah, that's a really great suggestion. Thank you for pointing that out, rather than waiting 10 minutes and then taking the suggestion themselves.
Yes, exactly. And also like teaming up on projects with that ally can be quite useful as well. I found that to work really, really nicely. I think you can get a lot more traction that way sometimes.
And you haven't found in that teaming up on projects that people then tend to think that you're not a partner, but you're more an assistant type of role? How has that worked for you?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I haven't personally found that. I don't know. I mean, maybe that has happened and I just haven't realized that was the perception. So you raise an excellent point, and I'm actually going to go away and consider that a bit further. I think in general, I'm fairly vocal about the things that I am working on. And so it's generally fairly clear that like we're equally driving something forward, within my own organization at least. I do sometimes find though, like sometimes with external entities, that they will treat me like an assistant, or I'm taking notes or something, or they assume I work in like, marketing or events, which nothing wrong with working in marketing or events, but like it's a very gendered assumption. So Yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that, I'm afraid. It continues to be tricky. I have actually read a lot of interesting things though in Harvard Business Review. I find that to be quite a good resource for that type of thing, connecting to the research, some practical tips about how to handle that type of thing, and also just this feeling of recognition. Or you might read a case study or someone else's story, and you're like, oh, I actually recognize that. Like that isn't just me. I feel like I have words to understand or a framework to understand this annoying, unpleasant thing that happened. And I think that helps a lot when you do have a negative interaction.
And I think that's a beautiful way of putting it again. Thank you, Sarah, because it's not necessarily sorts of things, and that's why I was saying it can be good or bad. It's just people's experiences. It might not always be recognized either, but I think that having a male ally so that you have somebody in the room with you and whose voice that others may go, oh, okay, I'm not hearing anybody else in the room, but I hear that voice. So that's a very good strategy. And also the teaming up on the projects. And I think, yes, in like your area, the Pawsey Supercomputing, because it's traditionally from an academic background, so people are used to seeing 2 or 3 people collaborating, and I kind of understood that you are collaborating, and like you so beautifully shared for outside, those types of dynamics or relationships are probably not as well understood, and people might think that you're an assistant or somebody from marketing, which is quite funny. As we come to the end of this, though, Sarah, what's the best way then for people to get hold of you?
I think probably LinkedIn might be the best way. You can find me on there. I've got an unusual last name, so there's not too many Sarah Beecrofts around. I think that's probably the way to go.
Fabulous. And I love this final question about any advice that you might have if you were to give some advice to your younger self.
Yes, excellent question. I would take the advice that my dad tried to give me at the beginning of my PhD that I didn't fully understand until quite some years later. It's always the way when parents give you advice that you don't listen the first time around. You have to learn it the hard way. But project management is a skill that is useful for pretty much anything, because it forces you to start thinking things through in a logical order of like, all right, so, I'm going to plan this party. I'm going to have 60 people. How many cups do I need to buy? How many drinks do I need? How many canapes do I need? And all this type of stuff. Like, obviously that's a toy example, but it's something that I was never very good at until I put in the effort to learn how to do it. The other thing was I went recently to this decision-making techniques course, and it was just so useful. I wish I had done that 10 or 15 years ago. I feel so much more equipped now to think through complex problems and try and address some of the assumptions that I would have made and not realized. So project management, decision-making techniques, everybody should do them. We'd make a lot better decisions and plans and this type of thing all together, I think, if we all did it.
What wonderful, wonderful. And again, very quite deep suggestions for your younger self around project management and decision-making techniques. I think that's really insightful, and again shows that just like way back with that growth mindset, you also have quite a number of different tools that you keep learning and reflecting on throughout your life and as you keep going through things. Well, Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you come on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been really great. So glad that we could have a bit of a discussion like this.
It's been fabulous. And thank you so much. And for everybody watching, thank you again for tuning in for another incredible episode. But for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.